Now let us start a new topic, method of conducting economic inquiry. Or in other words, in this lecture, what you will learn is the different steps involved in analyzing economic issues. The first step involved is casual observation. There are a lot of things happening in this world and a lot of them may or may not interest us. Suppose I get interested in a particular topic and I want to investigate this in greater detail. And so the first step involved in analyzing economic issues is casual observation, and based on your observation you get serious about some topic. And for me, for example, I'm very interested in a topic called migration, and the question I ask is, what are the reasons as to why people move from one country to another? Now, based on my interest in migration, the next step involved is to build up a hypothesis. And what is a hypothesis? It's an unverified or an untested if-then statement. It is based on your hunch or your intuitive feeling. What could be the reasons as to why people migrate from one country to another? And what I do is I write down different variables which may explain migration, say for example to the US. One of the major reasons as to why people may migrate to the US could be income differential between countries, and this is based on my observation, and that is US is surrounded by Canada on the north and Mexico on the south side. The income between Canada and US is not very different, so we do not have a migration issue from Canada. But if you look at the income difference between Mexico and the US, probably the average income in the US is about 10 to 20 times higher than that of Mexico. And we do have an issue of migration of people coming from Mexico to the US. Other factors could be political freedom or lack of it in the country from where this person wants to migrate. Another reason could be religious persecution. Another reason could be too much pollution and you want to get out of that country and probably move to some rural area in the US. So migration would depend on a number of factors, and what I do at this step is simply list the variables which may explain migration. Now I can build up my hypothesis, and that is based on what I know. Higher the income differential between countries, then higher will be the migration, and that's how I could explain why we have more people coming from Mexico rather than Canada. Or essentially what I have in mind is based on my hunch, which has not been tested. I am just trying to build up an if-then statement, and so I do this. Now, when I write down the hypotheses, what I have in mind is direction of causality. And by this we mean the following. We believe that migration is the variable that I want to explain. And so migration is called the dependent or an endogenous variable, the variable that I want to explain. And since dependent and endogenous means one and the same thing, we'll use them interchangeably during this course. Then we have a bunch of variables which impact migration, and all these variables are called independent or exogenous or autonomous variables. And since these terms, independent, exogenous or autonomous, mean one and the same thing, we'll use them interchangeably. So variables such as income differential, political freedom, and so on are all independent variables. And what we have in mind is the direction of causality, and that is changes in independent variables will cause changes in dependent variable. The third step involved in analyzing economic issues is listing an exhaustive set of assumptions under which the hypotheses may be valid. And what do we mean by assumptions? We just have to list the circumstances under which two, which is hypotheses, will be valid. Now consider the following. In terms of distance, Mexico is closer to the US as compared to a country in Africa. If you look at the income differential between US and Mexico and compare it to income differential between, say, US and a country in Africa, say, called Burkina Faso, and you'll find the income differential between Burkina Faso and US is much greater than what we have between Mexico and the US, and yet we do not have as many people migrating from Burkina Faso to the US relative to Mexico. So income differential between countries can explain migration, but there are certain assumptions involved under which this will be valid. Another thing under assumptions you should remember is we can use two types of analysis or assumptions, one called ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus is a simplifying assumption, and by this we mean holding all other variables as constant. For example, we know migration depends on a number of factors, and if I want to say analyze migration, what I'll do is I'll look at the impact of one independent variable on the dependent variable, just one independent variable at a time. So for example, if I want to look at the impact of income differential on migration, what I'll do is I'll hold all other variables such as political freedom, pollution, and so on as constant. If we do that, it's called ceteris paribus, and ceteris paribus is a simplifying assumption. This has to be compared with mutatis mutandis. Essentially what mutatis mutandis means is you take the real world as given, and we know real world is fairly complicated. A lot of things or a lot of variables are changing. So if we try to analyze everything under the sun, life is going to be complicated. So what we do in economics is we do not use mutatis mutandis. What we use is ceteris paribus, once again, which is a simplifying assumption. Now, based on our casual observation, we came up with a hypothesis, and then in step 3, what we did is we listed the circumstances under which the hypothesis may be valid. Now we have gotten very serious, and what we want to do is prove the hypothesis given the assumption in a rigorous manner. And here when we do this, in a way we move into the abstract world, and what we are trying to do is convince fellow academics that whatever hypotheses we have assumed or we have outlined and also listed the assumptions under which it may be valid, we want to prove this in a logical manner. And there are two ways we can use logic. One is intuitive, so you can use your own language that you are comfortable with, or say English in this case, and try to prove in an intuitive manner as to why hypotheses, which is step 2, may be valid given 3, which is the assumptions. Now, we know math or mathematics is the highest or the most logical subject, and it is highly developed. And what we do in economics is we use mathematics to prove or disprove anything. And another advantage with mathematics is, apart from being the most logical subject and a highly developed one where you can borrow a lot from mathematics, the third reason is it uses a very compact language, so it economizes on space and let us prove or disprove anything. And so this is the fourth step involved. An interesting thing is we are trying to analyze behavior of human beings, and imagine we use things like calculus and so on to prove or disprove human behavior or how people behave. This is fascinating, and that is why economics is considered to be applied mathematics. So this is step 4. Now, based on a casual observation, we wrote down the hypotheses, listed the assumptions under which the hypotheses may be valid, and then proved in a logical manner as to why the hypotheses may be valid. Now what we have to do in this step is go out to the real world and test whether the hypothesis applies to the real world situation, or what we call empirical justification of the hypotheses. Now, for empirical justification, we use a subject within economics called econometrics. And what is econometrics? Econometrics is the use of statistics to analyze economic issues. And we are not the only ones who borrow from statistics. Biologists do the same thing, and they have developed a subject called biometrics. And so what will be biometrics? It's the use of statistics to analyze issues in biology. Similarly, psychologists have this discipline called psychometrics. And what is psychometrics? It is the use of statistics to analyze issues in psychology. So we use econometrics in order to analyze issues in economics, and we use statistics. Statistics, once again, is a highly developed subject and uses compact language, and so it is easy for us to use statistics to see whether this applies to human beings like you and me. Now here is an interesting thing. Look at interdependence between subjects. We have talked about mathematics being used by other disciplines. Now in biology, way back in late 1950s, biometricians came up with something called the hazard function. And what they were trying to figure out is the following. Suppose an animal or an insect is born today. What are its chances of dying, say, in 1 week from now, or 1 month from now, or 3 months from now? Hazard function. And the inverse of hazard function is called the survival function. And what will be survival function? If an insect or an animal is born today, what are its chances of living beyond, say, 1 week or 1 month from today? Now, hazard and survival functions were developed in biometrics or by biometricians, and in the 1970s, some economists used these functions to analyze unemployment and employment issues. And the question they asked is the following. Suppose a person is laid off today. What are his chances of getting a job, say, 6 months from now or 1 year from now? This is called duration analysis. And for the work these people did on unemployment issues, for that work they received a Nobel Prize in economics. But what you should remember is the concepts they use originated in biology. So there is a lot of interdependence between subjects. In any case, this is the 5th step. Go out and test it on real human beings, empirical justification. If everything goes well from steps 1 through steps 5, what we will have, we can just conclude the research, and what we will have is a law in economics. And what is a law in economics? Something which makes logical sense and also applies to real human beings like you and me, and that gives us the law in economics. So here is a summary of steps involved in analyzing economic issues. The first step being casual observation. Based on that, we write down a hypothesis, which is just an untested or unverified if-then statement. Then we list the circumstances under which 2 may be valid. In step 4, what we do is we try to prove in a logical way why 2 may be valid given 3. We go out and test it on human beings, and if everything works out great, we can conclude our research. But if we fail at any step, we go back to step 1 or the previous step and try to modify our research. And this is how we conduct research in economics. Thank you for your time.